A single choice can unravel the universe. The deep space freighter Odyssey drifts through the void when a signal cuts through the silence, a broken whisper from a place every star chart marks as forbidden. Captain Aris Thorne hears its promise, a location, the final resting place of a civilization lost to time. He orders a course change, ignoring every warning, steering his ship and crew toward an irreversible journey into the unknown. By the end of this story, you will uncover the ultimate fate of a people who sacrificed everything and the terrifying power they tried to hide. What ancient secrets lie buried, waiting to be found, and what price would you pay to learn them? The Odyssey tore through the veil of shimmering energy. Alarms shrieked as the ship bucked violently, its systems flickering under the strain. Then, as suddenly as it began, the turbulence ceased. An unnerving silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the frantic beeping of damaged sensors. Outside the main viewport, the starfield was gone, replaced by a perpetual, deep violet twilight. And there, hanging in the stillness directly ahead, was the source of the signal. It was not a planet, but a ship. A colossal derelict, its architecture utterly alien, drifted in the void. Its hull was a tapestry of ruin, gouged by immense claws of energy and punctured by impacts that spoke of a ferocious battle. This was no peaceful relic. The scars were a brutal language, telling a story of a desperate, violent end that awaited any who came close enough to listen. The sheer scale of the derelict was dwarfed only by the world it orbited. A dead planet hung in the violet gloom, its surface glittering with the sharp, geometric facets of a fallen city. Captain Thorne ordered a landing party to the surface. Led by the ship's xenologist, Dr. Lena Vance, the away team set down on a plane of what looked like shattered glass. The air was still and cold, carrying the profound silence of a tomb. The ruins were not built from stone or metal, but from a crystalline substance that seemed to drink the dim light, reflecting it back in deep, prismatic hues. They walked through canyons of fractured rainbows, their boots crunching on glittering debris. The structures were impossibly tall and delicate, their purpose a complete mystery. Dr. Vance ran a gloved hand over a smooth, cold wall, her scanner emitting a soft, frustrated chime. The technology was everywhere, woven into the very architecture, but it was utterly inert. There were no power signatures, no faint hum of energy, just the absolute quiet of a machine that had been switched off for millennia. It was a city of ghosts, its most advanced wonders rendered into nothing more than beautiful, empty sculptures. The most chilling discovery was in a vast, circular plaza. One entire wall was a single, preserved mural, created from inlaid fragments of colored crystal. It depicted a thriving civilization, beings of light and energy living in harmony with their world. But the narrative shifted. A dark shape, a formless blot of black crystal, appeared in their sky. The subsequent images showed not a war, but a desperate mass exodus. Countless figures were shown streaming toward immense arcs, leaving their glorious city behind. They were not fighting the darkness. They were fleeing from it. What kind of threat could force a people with such power to simply abandon their home? The mural offered no answers, only the haunting image of a silent, deliberate retreat. A sharp crack echoed through the crystalline plaza, the sound of something ancient breaking its long silence. From a recess in the mural wall, a segment of the obsidian black crystal detached itself, unfolding into a humanoid form of impossible grace and menace. It stood a full head taller than any of them, its limbs slender and sharp, its surface absorbing the violet light. A single red eye ignited on its featureless face, sweeping over the landing party with a cold, mechanical judgment. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable energy that made the hair on their arms stand on end. A synthesized voice, devoid of any emotion, resonated not through the air but directly inside their minds. "You are not the progenitors. Leave this place of sorrow." The red eye held them for one terrifying second, then dimmed. The Sentinel's form collapsed back into an inert, black shard on the ground as if it had never been. The only evidence it left behind was a small, pulsating data crystal, now resting where it had stood. Dr. Vance slowly reached down and picked it up. It was warm to the touch, humming with a soft, internal light. The Guardian's words were not a request. They were a final warning from a dead world, a plea etched in code. What sorrow was this place built upon, and why were they, mere visitors from the stars, deemed unworthy to witness it? The answer, she knew, was now trapped in the crystal burning in her hand. The data crystal felt alive in Lena's hand, a tiny, warm heart beating with forgotten history. Back aboard the Odyssey, isolated in her lab, she interfaced the alien artifact with her ship's computer. The crystal did not simply display information, it projected it, flooding the room with ghostly light and sound. A voice, soft and melodic yet etched with a profound, universal sorrow, began to speak. It was the final testament of the Zhar. They were not warriors but creators, beings who had learned to weave starlight into solid form, building their crystalline cities as symphonies of art and science. Their recordings showed a society in perfect balance with its world, until the day their long-range sensors detected the anomaly. They called it the Devourer. It was not a fleet, not an army, but a single ravenous entity of pure entropy. A living void that consumed not just matter, but space, time, and reality itself. It moved through the galaxy like a blight, leaving absolute nothingness in its wake. The Zhar knew they could not fight it. Their every weapon, every conceivable energy discharge was simply absorbed, making the entity stronger. Their only choice was a desperate mass exodus, a flight into the void to buy their species more time. But they left something behind. Their final log entry was a message of heartbreaking sacrifice. A small contingent of volunteers remained, their mission to complete and conceal their civilization's last, most terrible creation. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of negation, a device designed to create a stable pocket of non-reality, a perfect, eternal cage. This ultimate defense was sealed within a shielded vault, buried deep in the heart of their dead homeworld. The planet below was not just their tomb. It was a prison, and they were its final doomed wardens. The crystal's light faded, leaving Lena in the dimness of her lab, the echo of that ancient sacrifice hanging in the air. They had not fled out of fear, but out of hope, leaving their greatest and most dangerous secret behind to protect the universe. The question now was not what they had left, but whether that prison door was still sealed. The weight of the Zhar's sacrifice still hung in the air when a new shadow fell across the Odyssey. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear, the stars distorting as a sleek, predatory vessel shimmered into existence. It was the Harbinger, a notorious corporate raider, its hull bristling with weapons that glowed with malevolent intent. A harsh, uncompromising voice crackled over the comms. "We know what you found, Thorne. Transmit the planetary coordinates and stand down. This is your only warning." Captain Thorne's response was a terse order to raise shields, his hands flying across his console. The Harbinger did not wait for a second refusal. A lance of emerald energy slammed into the Odyssey's defensive screens, shaking the entire ship to its bones. Alarms blared anew, this time signaling a very real and present danger. The Odyssey was a freighter, built for hauling cargo, not for fighting wars. Its shields flared under the relentless assault, their power reserves dropping with every punishing impact. The chase was a brutal dance of desperation. Thorne pushed the freighter's engines far beyond their design limits, weaving through the void in a frantic attempt to evade the Harbinger's superior targeting systems. Another blast caught their starboard side, and a console on the bridge exploded in a shower of sparks. They were being hunted, and their hunter was toying with them, herding them toward a dead end. Thorne's eyes scanned the tactical display, his options vanishing one by one. Then he saw it, a graveyard of cosmic rubble on the edge of the scanner's range. It was a massive asteroid field, a chaotic maze of spinning rock and ice. It was a navigational nightmare, a place where one wrong turn would mean a quick and crushing end. But it was also their only chance. Thorne made the call, all power to forward shields and engines, plot a micro-jump right into the heart of it. The helmsman's voice was tight with fear, but his hands were steady. "The coordinates are locked, Captain." The Harbinger loomed large in the rear display, its weapons charging for a final, crippling shot. The stars stretched into blinding lines of light as the Odyssey leapt forward, not into open space, but into the swirling, unforgiving chaos of the field. The Odyssey shuddered out of its micro-jump, its hull groaning in protest as it decelerated hard. The chaotic tumble of the asteroid field was gone, replaced by an impossible stillness. Directly before them hung the Zhar homeworld, but it was not the dead, glittering tomb they had scanned from afar. The entire planet was encased in a gentle, shimmering sphere of golden light, a bubble of frozen time adrift in the violet void. Through the translucent field, they could see the surface in perfect, horrifying detail. This was no ruin. It was a snapshot of apocalypse, perfectly preserved. The crystalline cities were not shattered, but whole and breathtakingly beautiful, their spires catching a light that had not moved in millennia. But the sky above them was wrong, a swirling vortex of absolute blackness, a storm of nothingness that had been caught in the act of devouring the world. The Devourer was still there, frozen mid-strike. An eternal wave of annihilation halted just before it could crash down upon the pristine cities below. They were not looking at a graveyard, but at a museum exhibit of a civilization's final, terrified second. How do you build a cage for the end of everything? The Zhar had not just fled, they had engineered a miracle, a perfect stasis to imprison their predator. But a prison requires a warden, and a cage this perfect demands a key. The silence from the planet was no longer the silence of the dead, but the profound, breathless hush of a trap that has been waiting, patiently, for someone to finally arrive and spring it. The shimmering golden sphere around the planet was a perfect, unbroken shield. Captain Thorne knew the Harbinger would be right behind them, and that field was their only sanctuary. On the bridge, Chief Engineer Kale's voice was a low, focused hum. He explained that the stasis field wasn't a solid barrier, but a harmonic resonance, a single, impossibly complex energy frequency holding time itself in check. The Odyssey's own deflector shields operated on a similar principle, albeit on a vastly simpler scale. If he could recalibrate their shield emitters, if he could match the field's frequency for just a fraction of a second, they might be able to slip through without triggering a catastrophic reaction. The alternative was to wait for the Harbinger to arrive and tear them apart. It was a theory built on guesswork and desperation. The entire engineering team worked in a frenzy, rerouting power and rewriting shield modulation protocols. Alerts flashed across Kale's console, warnings of system overload and potential emitter collapse. Then he gave the signal. Thorne gave the order. The Odyssey accelerated toward the Golden Wall. For a heart-stopping moment, the ship met the field. Instead of a violent impact, there was a sound like a universe of glass humming a single, pure note. The viewport filled with blinding gold light, and the ship shuddered, every bolt and beam straining as it was pulled through a substance thicker than space. Then they were through. The golden light was gone, replaced by the eerie, frozen tableau of the planet below. But their triumph was instantly silenced by a chorus of new alarms. A deafening explosion rocked the engineering bay. The strain had been too much. The primary engine manifold was offline, and the secondary systems were failing, trailing plasma and coolant into the void. They had made it to the surface, but their ship was crippled, a sitting duck. And as their damaged scanners flickered back to life, they registered a new energy spike from the edge of the golden field. The Harbinger had found them, and it was beginning its own inevitable breach. The Odyssey settled on a wide, crystalline plaza, its landing struts groaning against the unnatural silence. Outside, the air was utterly still, thick with the scent of ozone and something sweet like petrified nectar. The city was a masterpiece of frozen time. Every spire and archway was pristine, their facets glittering as if freshly carved. They stepped out onto streets of smooth, fused crystal, their footsteps making no sound in the dense, motionless atmosphere. The first building they entered was a dwelling, its arched doorway open in silent welcome. Inside, a table was set for a meal. Bowls of a luminous, gelatinous substance sat untouched, their surfaces perfectly smooth and still. Chairs were slightly pulled back, as if the occupants had risen just a moment ago, called away by some sudden, universal alarm. There were no signs of panic, no overturned furniture or scattered belongings. It was a scene of peaceful domesticity, interrupted with a politeness that was more terrifying than any chaos. They moved on into a vast public square. Hundreds of the Zhar were there, their forms sculpted from light and solidified energy, captured in mid-stride. A parent reached for a child's hand. A group conversed, their faces tilted upward, their postures relaxed. Every single one of them was looking toward the sky, their expressions not of fear but of a profound, resigned sorrow. They had not been running, they had been watching. They had known the Devourer was coming, and they had chosen to meet their end with a quiet dignity, accepting the sacrifice a handful of their people were making deep below. The city was not a ruin. It was a memorial to the last second of a civilization that had looked into the abyss, and instead of screaming, had chosen to save the universe from what followed. What does it say about a threat when the only logical response is not to fight, but to stand completely still? The profound silence of the city was a weight upon the soul. While the crew worked to stabilize the crippled Odyssey, Dr. Lena Vance followed a different path, a faint energy signature her only guide. It led her to a structure unlike the others, a low, hexagonal building whose crystalline walls pulsed with a soft, internal rhythm. This was the archive, the mind of the Zhar civilization. The entrance was not a door, but a membrane of light that parted at her approach, admitting her into a chamber of swirling, liquid data. In the center of the room, a single pedestal held a flawless sphere of crystal. As she placed her hand upon it, the archive did not speak to her in words. It spoke in memories, in feelings, in the collective consciousness of a people facing their extinction. She saw the Zhar not as the frozen statues outside, but as a vibrant species on the cusp of a magnificent transformation. Their science had unlocked the next stage of their evolution, a transcendence from physical form into beings of pure consciousness, able to live within the fabric of space-time itself. It was their destiny, their promised future, a state of being they had worked toward for generations, and they chose to sacrifice it. The vision shifted, showing the desperate final days. They realized the Devourer did not hunt by sight or sound, but by sensing the unique psychic energy of advanced consciousness. Their planned transcendence would have been a beacon, a brilliant flare that would draw the entity directly to them, and then to every other thinking species in the galaxy. Their evolution would have doomed the universe, so they made the ultimate choice. They used the very energy meant for their own ascension, the collective power of their entire civilization, to fuel the stasis field. They poured their future into a single, perfect moment of pause, creating a prison that hid not just their world, but their very potential. They did not just die. They erased their own destiny to become a silent, forgotten shield for all life. Lena pulled her hand back, the echo of that unimaginable sacrifice burning in her mind. They had not hidden from the Devourer out of fear for themselves, but out of a final, desperate act of love for a cosmos that would never know their name. What does it mean to give up your soul to save strangers? The archive held the answer, and it was a truth almost too heavy to bear. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the very crystal beneath their feet. The Harbinger descended through the golden stasis field like a blade through water. Its dark, angular form a stark blasphemy against the frozen beauty of the city. It settled a short distance from the crippled Odyssey, its landing struts striking the silent plaza with a definitive, metallic clang that echoed in the dense air. A ramp hissed down and a figure emerged, flanked by 4 heavily armored mercenaries. He was tall and severe, his sharp-featured face all hard lines and cold calculation. This was Commander Valerius. He strode toward Captain Thorne, his boots making the only real sound in the entire world. He did not look at the frozen Zhar, at the heartbreaking tableau of a civilization's last moment. His eyes were only for Thorne and for the prize he represented. This technology, Valerius declared, his voice cutting through the unnatural quiet, belongs to my corporation. The stasis field, the energy source that powers it, it is a proprietary asset. You will stand aside. The demand hung in the air, a stark ultimatum laid upon a world that was a monument to selflessness. Thorne stood his ground, the weight of the archive's revelation fresh in his mind. He saw not a resource to be claimed, but a sacred trust to be upheld. You misunderstand what this place is, Thorne replied, his voice low but steady. This is not a treasure vault. It is a tomb and a prison. That thing in the sky is the prisoner. Valerius offered a thin, dismissive smile. A prisoner requires a warden, and a warden holds the keys. My company will become that warden. We will control the power that holds back the void. Imagine the leverage, the security such a thing provides. He was not looking at a miracle of sacrifice. He was looking at the ultimate deterrent, a weapon of cosmic blackmail. The fate of the Zhar legacy now balanced on a knife's edge. Caught between a captain who understood the cost of its power and a commander who only saw its price. The confrontation with Valerius was a silent war of wills, fought in the shadow of a frozen sky. Thorne knew he could not win a physical fight, not with his ship crippled and his crew outgunned. His only hope lay in the planet itself, in finishing what the Zhar had started. Dr. Vance's tricorder chirped, its scanner finally locking onto a powerful, shielded energy signature emanating from deep beneath their feet. The source was not the surface city, but something far below, a nexus of power humming at the planet's core. The weapon vault. Valerius saw the shift in their focus, the glance at the scanner. He barked an order to his own tech, and the race began. It was a sprint through a gallery of statues. 2 teams of living beings moving with frantic urgency through a world trapped in a single, silent breath. The signal led them to a massive, circular dais in the city's central plaza, a structure they had mistaken for a monument. As they approached, intricate lines of light etched themselves into its surface, converging on a central pedestal. A holographic interface materialized above it, displaying a double helix of swirling, luminous energy. This was the lock. Dr. Vance ran a diagnostic. The system was demanding a specific genetic key, a living Zhar DNA sequence. It was a final, heartbreaking security measure. The vault would not open for conquerors or thieves, only for its creators. But the Zhar were gone, their physical forms dissolved into the energy of the stasis field eons ago. There was no body to scan, no remains to sample. Hope seemed to evaporate until Chief Engineer Kale, studying the city's power grid, found an anomaly. A single structure on the edge of the city was drawing a minute but constant trickle of power, independent of the frozen main grid. It was a life seed repository, a genetic library where the Zhar had stored the biological blueprints of their entire ecosystem. A final act of preservation before their sacrifice. It was their only chance. Valerius' team was already moving toward the vault dais, their heavy mining lasers being unloaded. They plan to cut their way in, consequences be damned. Thorne split his team. He and a few others would create a diversion, trying to delay the inevitable breach, while Lena and Kale ran for the repository. Every second was a gamble against the hubris of men who saw a sanctuary as a prize to be cracked open. Could they find a key made of light and memory before their rivals brought the entire delicate prison down upon them all? The repository was a sanctuary of frozen potential, its entrance hidden behind a cascade of solidified light that parted at their touch. Inside, Kale and his escort moved through a forest of crystalline pillars, each one a sarcophagus for a single glowing strand of DNA. The air hummed with a low, persistent energy, the sound of life itself held in perfect suspension. They were hunters in a library of ghosts, searching for one specific volume in a collection of millions. While they began their desperate search, Dr. Lena Vance was already at work, her portable terminal linked to the archive's central core. The Zhar language was not written in letters, but in cascading patterns of light, a genetic code expressed as art. She saw sequences that dictated not just physical form, but aspects of consciousness, empathy, and creativity. It was a blueprint for a soul. Her heart hammered in her chest as she cross-referenced the genetic markers required by the vault's lock with the repository's vast catalog. The final piece of the key was not a simple biological signature. It was a specific genetic sequence tied to the volunteer wardens, the ones who had stayed behind to activate the prison. These sequences were marked by a unique telomere structure, a biological timestamp that indicated a predetermined, accelerated cellular decay. They were not meant to live long. Their sacrifice was coded into their very cells. She found the reference, a complex helix glowing with a soft, amber light. She transmitted the pattern to Kale's scanner just as the sound of heavy, armored footsteps echoed from the corridor outside the repository. They were out of time. Kale's scanner lit up, its beam sweeping across the pillars until it locked onto one that pulsed with a matching amber hue. The security officer took up a defensive position at the entrance as Kale worked, his tools carefully extracting a single, luminous filament of genetic data from the pillar. It was not a physical sample, but a perfect digital copy, a soul rendered into pure information. A burst of weapon fire shattered the silence outside. The corporate patrol had found them. The security officer returned fire, providing cover. "Go, now, get it to the vault." Kale fled through a secondary archway, the genetic key burning in his data slate, as the sounds of a brief, brutal firefight echoed behind him. He did not look back. He ran through the silent city, a living man carrying the last echo of a dead warden, hoping it would be enough to appease the lock on a door that should never be opened. Kale burst into the hexagonal archive, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He thrust the data slate toward Lena, the amber helix glowing brightly on its screen. "We have the key," he managed, "but we need a lock. The vault's genetic scanner is on the dais. We cannot just transmit this data, it has to be presented as a living sequence." Lena's eyes widened with a terrible understanding. The genetic key was not a code to be entered. It was a biological signature that needed to be read. They had the blueprint, but no body. Her gaze swept the archive, her mind racing through the Zhar records. Then she saw it, a chamber she had dismissed as a power conduit. It was a cylindrical pod of milky crystal, humming with a low, persistent energy. The life seed incubator. It was not just a library, but a workshop. The theory was madness, a violation of every ethical code, but Valerius was already at the vault, and the sound of plasma torches cutting through ancient crystal was a distant, terrifying whine. "We have to build the key," she said, her voice tight. She interfaced the data slate with the incubator. The pod swirled with light, drawing on the stored biological raw materials from the surrounding pillars. A form began to coalesce within the milky substance, growing with impossible speed. In moments, a figure floated in the nutrient-rich suspension. It was a Zhar. Her form was slender, her skin the color of opal, and her long hair a cascade of solidified light. She was a mirror of the statues outside, but alive. Lena initiated the awakening sequence. The fluid drained and the being gasped, her eyes flying open. They were pools of molten silver, filled with a deep, ancient confusion. She did not speak, but a wave of pure, emotional memory washed over them, a psychic echo of the final days. Fear, resolve, and a crushing sorrow. Lena reached out, her voice a gentle probe. "What is your name?" The Zhar's thoughts formed directly in their minds, a whisper of fractured sound and image. "I am Zara, the last Warden. The world it is still." She looked toward the archive entrance as if she could see the frozen sky. The Devourer sleeps. Her memories were not a clean record, but a shattered mosaic. She remembered the decision to stay, the goodbyes whispered to loved ones who were leaving, the feeling of the planet's energy being drawn upward into the great golden shield. She remembered her purpose, to be the final guardian of the vault. But the memory of what was inside was a dark, terrifying blank, a door in her mind she could not open. "The key to the vault is you, Zara," Lena said softly. "Your very life is the combination." Zara looked at her own hands, a flicker of understanding in her silver eyes. She was not just a person, she was a relic, a living, breathing key fashioned for a single, terrible purpose. Her existence was a paradox, a ghost given flesh to confront the very entity that had killed her people. But as she took a step, a tremor ran through her. A faint, web-like crack appeared on the back of her hand, leaking a soft, golden light instead of blood. She was not built to last. The cloning process was unstable, a rushed miracle. She was a candle already burning at both ends, and they were asking her to walk into the storm. Zara's form flickered like a dying star, the cracks across her skin glowing brighter with every labored breath. She looked from Lena to the distant, frozen storm in the sky. "The weapon is not what your commander believes," her voice whispered in their minds, a thread of sound woven from sorrow. "It does not destroy, it seals." It was designed to fold a piece of reality around the Devourer, creating a perfect, self-contained pocket dimension from which it could never escape. But such an act requires two things: a power source equivalent to the total psychic energy of our entire civilization at the moment of its transcendence. Her silver eyes held Lena's, and in them was the weight of 1,000,000,000 lost futures, and a conscious mind to guide the energy, to act as the anchor point for the new reality. That mind cannot survive the transition. It is a sacrifice, not a trigger. The weapon does not fire, it consumes. The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. Valerius was not trying to acquire a tool of ultimate power. He was trying to claim a suicide switch, a device that demanded a soul as its price. And he would not hesitate to pay that price with someone else's life, or worse, try to circumvent it and unleash a cataclysm. His desire to control this power was not ambition. It was a form of cosmic madness, the belief that he could outsmart a failsafe designed by a species that had sacrificed its own evolution. How do you explain the value of a single life to a man who only sees the zeros on a balance sheet? The answer was a chilling certainty: you cannot. The archive's heavy silence was shattered by the sharp, unmistakable click of a weapon's safety being disengaged. Kale stood frozen, his engineering tool still in his hand, as he stared down the barrel of a plasma pistol held by Ensign Rorik, a man he had served alongside for 3 years. The betrayal was a cold knife in the gut. Rorik's face, usually open and friendly, was a mask of tense resolve. His eyes flickered toward Zara. "The corporation pays better than freight runs, Captain," he stated, his voice unnervingly calm. "They want the asset. Stand aside." Before anyone could react, Rorik fired a single, precise shot into the main comms console, sending a shower of sparks and acrid smoke into the air. Their only link to the orbiting Harbinger, however tenuous, was gone. He then lunged for Zara, his free hand grabbing her fragile arm. She cried out, a soundless, psychic wave of pain and fear that washed over everyone in the room. The cracks on her skin flared with a painful, bright light. In that frozen second, the security officer who had covered their retreat in the repository acted on pure instinct. He tackled Rorik from the side, sending them both crashing into a crystalline data pillar. The plasma pistol skittered across the floor. The fight was brutal and chaotic in the confined space, a stark violation of the Archive's sacred quiet. Crystalline structures shattered under the weight of grappling bodies. A stray energy bolt from a backup sidearm seared a black scar across a wall of swirling light, erasing millennia of stored history in an instant. It was over in less than a minute. Rorik, pinned and disarmed, glared up at Thorne, his chest heaving. "You are protecting a ghost to save ghosts," he spat. "Valerius will crack this world open and take what he wants. You are just delaying the inevitable." The immediate threat was neutralized, but a deeper, more insidious damage was done. As the crew secured the traitor, the atmosphere on the bridge shifted. Glances that were once trusting now held a flicker of suspicion. If Rorik, a veteran of a dozen runs, could be turned, who else might have a price? The corporation's reach was longer and more venomous than they had feared. They were not just fighting an external enemy anymore. The very trust that held them together had been fractured, and in a place where a single wrong move could unravel reality itself, that fracture felt more dangerous than any corporate warship. How do you guard a secret when you can no longer trust the person standing watch beside you? The low, angry whine of plasma torches began to eat into the crystalline dais. Valerius had abandoned all pretense of subtlety. His team focused on carving a hole directly into the planet's heart. Each searing blast sent spiderwebs of fractures through the surrounding structure, the ancient crystal groaning under the assault. From his vantage point behind a frozen fountain, Captain Thorne watched the methodical destruction. They were outnumbered and outgunned. A direct confrontation would be a brief, bloody affair. But as his eyes scanned the plaza, he saw not a dead city, but a machine. The Zhar had built their world to respond to thought, to intention. Their entire civilization was an interface. He remembered the Sentinel that had activated upon their first arrival, a dormant guardian triggered by their presence. The city was not just a memorial, it was a system waiting for a command. Thorne keyed his calm, his voice a low whisper to Lena, still in the archive. "The city's defenses, the Sentinels, can you find a way to wake them up? Not just one, all of them." In the archive, Lena's fingers flew across her terminal, pulling up the architectural schematics Zara had unlocked. She found it, a network of harmonic resonators woven through every spire and street. A city-wide alarm system designed for a threat that had never come from the ground. The activation protocol was not a switch, but a song, a specific energy frequency that would resonate through the crystalline lattice. She began the sequence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to build, rising from beneath their feet. All across the plaza, from recesses in walls and the bases of statues, segments of obsidian black crystal detached and unfolded. Dozens of sentinels now stood where there had been empty space, their single red eyes igniting in unison. The synthesized voice that had once spoken only in their minds now echoed across the plaza as a unified chorus. "Intruders, desecrators, you will cease." The corporate team froze, their plasma torches sputtering out as they turned to face this new, unexpected army. The silent city was no longer a passive backdrop. It had become a living, breathing battlefield, and its ancient guardians were finally answering the call of the only Warden left in the universe. The low hum of the Sentinel chorus was drowned out by a new sound, a high-pitched whine building from the city's spires themselves. Kale, watching from a shielded conduit access point, saw his chance. While the Obsidian Guardians advanced, their red eyes locking onto Valerius mercenaries, he rerouted the last of the Odyssey's auxiliary power. He bypassed the main grid, feeding energy directly into the ancient city's automated defense network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a series of sharp, crystalline clicks, the very architecture came alive. Sections of the ornate spires swiveled, revealing emplacements of polished quartz that glowed with a fierce, blue-white light. Lances of coherent energy snapped across the plaza, not with the wild fury of plasma, but with the cold, precise logic of a long-dormant immune system. The corporate forces, caught between the advancing sentinels and this sudden artillery from above, were thrown into disarray. Their formation broke as they scrambled for cover behind frozen statues and the Harbinger's landing struts, their return fire pitting the ancient crystal but failing to silence the turrets. This was the chaos Thorne had prayed for. Under the cover of the erupting defensive fire, his small team moved. They slipped from their hiding places, weaving through the chaotic crossfire. The entrance to the vault was no longer a sealed dais, but a gaping, smoldering hole where Valerius' torches had been at work. The air around it shimmered with heat and the acrid smell of vaporized crystal. They did not hesitate. One by one, they dropped into the darkness below, leaving the battle above for the silence of the planet's heart. The city was fighting its own war now, a desperate, automated rearguard action to protect the terrible truth buried deep within, buying them the precious seconds they needed to confront what the Zhar had sealed away. The darkness beneath the city was not an absence of light, but a substance, thick and humming with latent power. They descended through a shaft lined with pulsing crystalline filaments, each one a vein carrying energy toward a single point far below. The air grew warmer, charged with a static that raised the hair on their arms and tasted of ozone and ancient dust. At the base of the shaft, the passage opened into a cavern of impossible scale. This was the heart of the vault. There was no colossal cannon, no stockpile of world-shattering bombs. The chamber was dominated by a single, breathtaking structure. At its center, suspended in a web of intricate light, floated a complex, three-dimensional matrix of shifting energy. It looked like a captured nebula, a swirling cosmos of gold and silver filaments constantly folding in on itself, perpetually on the verge of forming a new pattern. And before it, on a raised dais of pure white crystal, stood a simple, throne-like chair. Its design was elegant, almost inviting, but from it snaked conduits of raw light that fed directly into the heart of the swirling matrix. Zara stumbled forward, her cracked hand reaching out toward the energy field. A wave of recognition, of profound and terrible familiarity, washed over her fragile form. "This is the seal," her voice echoed in their minds, weak and frayed. "It is a thought given form, a command to reality itself. To activate it requires more than a command code. It requires a consciousness to become the command. A mind must merge with the matrix, to guide the energy and define the new boundaries of the pocket dimension that will become the Devourer's eternal cell. The process is absolute. The mind that enters does not return, it becomes the lock." Captain Thorne stared at the swirling energy, the truth finally crystallizing with horrifying clarity. The Zhar had not built a weapon to be fired and forgotten. They had engineered the ultimate sacrifice, a device that demanded a volunteer to surrender their very existence to become a permanent part of the prison walls. The power source was the collective spirit of a civilization. The anchor was a single, annihilated soul. The throne was not a control seat, it was an altar. A low, resonant thrum began to vibrate through the very floor of the cavern, a deep bass note that had nothing to do with the battle raging on the surface. It was a sound felt more than heard, a tremor in the fabric of space itself. On the bridge of the crippled Odyssey, the few remaining crew members watched in horror as their long-range sensor display dissolved into chaos. A massive, spatial anomaly was tearing its way into the system. a blot of seething non-space that devoured the light from distant stars as it approached. The golden stasis field around the planet began to flicker, its perfect, shimmering surface rippling like a pond struck by a stone. The frozen storm in the sky, the Devourer itself, seemed to stir. The absolute blackness of its form churned with a new, terrifying purpose, its edges wavering as if testing the strength of its cage. Reality was groaning under a pressure it was never meant to bear. The Zhar's ancient warnings were not just history. They were a countdown that had just reached its final, desperate seconds. The prison walls were failing, and the prisoner was waking up. How do you run from a predator that consumes the very ground you stand on? The answer, written in the frantic data streams and the buckling stasis field, was a chilling and absolute truth. You cannot. The cavern trembled, dust of ages shaking loose from the crystalline ceiling as the vault entrance exploded inward. Commander Valerius strode through the smoke and shards, his mercenaries fanning out behind him, their weapons trained on Thorne's small, unarmed group. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept past them, past the swirling matrix of cosmic energy, and locked onto the simple throne. A predatory smile touched his lips. He had found the control panel for the universe. "You have my gratitude for unlocking the door, Thorne," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "but the tour is over." He gestured, and two of his armored soldiers moved toward Zara. She recoiled, the cracks across her body flaring with a pained, golden light. "You cannot command this power," her psychic voice whispered, a desperate plea in their minds. "It is not a tool, it is a covenant." Valerius ignored her, his gaze fixed on the throne. "Every power is a tool," he declared. "It is only a matter of understanding the operating manual." He pointed a commanding finger at the chair. "Put her in it. Now." As the soldiers grabbed her fragile arms, Thorne's crew moved to intercept, but they were halted by the raised weapons of the other mercenaries. It was a standoff, a brutal tableau of force against futility. Zara struggled, her form flickering violently, her silent screams of terror echoing through their souls. Valerius watched, utterly unmoved, his ambition a shield against her suffering. "This energy will make me a god," he breathed, his voice full of a terrifying, absolute conviction. "I will not just control a corporation. I will hold the key to existence itself. Any who defy me will face not just death, but absolute erasure." He believed he was not activating a prison, but claiming a throne. He saw the sacrifice as a price he was willing to force others to pay, the ultimate act of corporate leverage. In that moment, he was not a man, but the embodiment of the very consumption the Zhar had died to stop. A devourer of hope and meaning, blind to the truth that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Time seemed to stretch and fray as the soldiers forced Zara toward the throne. Her silent psychic screams were a storm of pure terror in their minds, the light bleeding from her cracks, painting the cavern in desperate, golden strokes. Captain Aris Thorne saw the terrible calculation in Valerius' eyes, a man so blinded by the reflection of power that he could not see the abyss it guarded. He would break the seal, and in doing so, he would shatter the universe. There was no more time for plans, for tricks, for hoping someone else would pay the price. The choice was here, now, and it was his alone to make. He took a single step forward, his voice cutting through the chaotic energy. "No, let her go, use me." The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. Valerius raised a hand, halting his soldiers. He studied Thorne, a flicker of cold amusement in his gaze. "A volunteer, how noble," he gestured toward the throne. "By all means, Captain, show me how a martyr operates the controls." As the mercenaries released Zara, who collapsed into Lena's arms, Thorne walked to the dais. He did not look at his crew, at the faces of the people he had led into this nightmare. He looked only at the chair, at the conduits of raw light that promised not power, but an end. He sat. The moment his body touched the crystal, the world dissolved. It was not pain, but an overwhelming rush of being, a torrent of information that was not data but sensation, memory, and potential. His mind, a finite vessel, was suddenly poured into an infinite ocean. He could feel the delicate lattice of the stasis field, a single, perfect note holding back the silent, screaming hunger of the Devourer. He could sense the faint, fading psychic echoes of the Zhar, the billion souls who had poured their future into this single, fragile moment. Their sacrifice was not a historical fact. It was a living, breathing force, and it welcomed him, weaving his consciousness into its ancient pattern. He understood the machine now. It was not a weapon to be aimed or fired. It was a loom, and he was the thread. To activate the seal was to redefine a piece of reality, to take the ravenous, formless entity and wrap it in a new law of physics. A self-contained universe with one simple rule: nothing enters or leaves. But to weave that new reality required a constant, conscious anchor. His mind would become the fundamental particle upon which that new universe was built. He would not die. He would become a permanent, sentient part of the prison walls, forever holding the line against the nothingness, aware and alone for all eternity. The cost of salvation was not death, but an endless, silent vigil. And in that final, terrifying moment of comprehension, Aris Thorne made his choice. He reached out with his newfound cosmic awareness, not to fight the Devourer, but to embrace it. He began the final sequence. A brilliant, silent nova of energy erupted from the throne, swallowing Aris Thorne whole. His body was no longer a boundary, but a conduit, a riverbed for the entire psychic potential of the Zhar civilization. He did not feel the planet's core energy as heat or force, but as a river of memories, of hopes, of love for a universe they would never see. He channeled this vast, gentle power toward the swirling matrix, and the machine obeyed its final, programmed thought. It did not push, it pulled. High above, in the violet sky, the golden stasis field did not shatter. It flowed. It unwound from the planet like a silken banner, its energy streaking down into the vault, into Thorne, and through him into the seal. The frozen storm of the Devourer, robbed of its cage, surged forward to complete its eons-delayed feast. But it did not find a world. It found a door. A rift in reality tore open before it, not a black hole, but a window into a universe of absolute, pristine order. This new dimension was a perfect geometric lattice, a cosmos with no stars, no planets, no chaos, and no life. It was the ultimate paradox, a beautiful, empty cage designed to hold the ultimate consumer of beauty and life. The Devourer, driven by an instinct older than time, plunged into the rift, its formless hunger meeting a reality with nothing to consume. The moment it crossed the threshold, the window began to close. And as it sealed, the cost became terrifyingly clear. Back in the vault, Thorne's physical form began to dissolve. It was not a violent disintegration, but a quiet unraveling like sand sculptures succumbing to the tide. His hands, still resting on the arms of the throne, turned translucent, then faded into motes of golden light that flowed back into the conduits. There was no pain, only a profound and expanding sense of connection. He could feel the new pocket dimension stabilizing, its laws solidifying around the trapped entity. He could feel the frantic, confused hunger of the Devourer as it beat against the walls of its impossible prison. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, that he was those walls. His consciousness was the bedrock of that new reality, the sentient lock on a door that must never be opened again. He had not destroyed the monster. He had become its eternal warden, a silent guardian woven into the fabric of a cosmos he would never again see or touch. The last thing to fade was the ghost of a smile on his face, a final human expression of acceptance for a duty that would last until the end of time. The golden light that had held the world in its gentle grasp for millennia simply winked out. The silence that followed was not peaceful, but deafening, a vacuum where a miracle had once lived. Then the sound began. It was a soft, mournful sigh rising from the very bones of the planet. The pristine, crystalline city around them began to age 1,000,000 years in a single moment. The soaring spires, once flawless, clouded over, their vibrant colors leaching away into a uniform, deathly gray. Intricate facades, frozen in perfect detail, crazed with 1,000,000,000 hairline fractures. A gentle, almost imperceptible wind stirred, and where it touched, the ancient structures dissolved. It was not a violent collapse, but a quiet surrender. Towers that had defied eons crumbled into clouds of fine, glittering dust, falling in on themselves without a roar, but with the soft hiss of sand through an hourglass. The planet was not being destroyed. It was simply finishing the long, slow fall that had been paused so long ago, returning to the dust from which it had been woven. The crew did not run. They watched, mesmerized and heartbroken, as an entire civilization turned to memory before their eyes. This was the true cost of their salvation, the final, physical evidence of the Zhar's sacrifice returning to the void. They had given their future, their world, and now, even the beautiful shell of their past was being reclaimed. There was no time for mourning. The ground beneath their feet shuddered, great chasms opening in the disintegrating streets. They ran for the Odyssey, their boots kicking up plumes of ancient dust, the air thick with the scent of ozone and fine silica. Zara moved between them, her own form flickering, the golden light within her dimming as the world that had created her returned to nothing. She did not look back. She had seen this moment in the memories of her people, the inevitable end they had accepted. To see it now was to complete a circle of grief that had spanned eons. As the Odyssey's engines whined to life, straining against the failing gravity, the view from the viewport was a terrifying tapestry of dissolution. The entire planet was coming apart, continents of crystal dissolving into shimmering rings of debris. They rose through a sky filled with falling stars of dead cities, the last, beautiful funeral shroud for a people who had asked for nothing in return for their infinite gift. The ship broke orbit just as the world at its center collapsed into a final, brilliant cloud of silver dust, which then slowly, silently, dispersed into the black. They had escaped with their lives, and with a single, fragile witness to a truth that would now be theirs alone to carry. What do you do with a story that cost a universe to tell? The stars outside the viewport were cold and distant, a stark contrast to the warmth of the life they had left behind in the dissipating dust cloud. Inside the Odyssey's mess hall, the silence was heavy with a grief too large for words. They had saved the universe, but the price of that victory was a ghost that walked among them. Zara stood apart, her opalescent form seeming to draw the dim light from the room, her very presence a monument to all that had been lost. She watched the crew, these fragile, temporary beings who had fought not for power, but for a principle they barely understood. Her people had chosen isolation and sacrifice to protect life. These humans had chosen to stand with a ghost against impossible odds. The difference was not one of capability, but of spirit. She felt the instability in her own cloned form, the cellular decay that was her birthright, and knew her time was limited. But it was not over. A choice remained. She moved to where Captain Lena Vance sat, staring into a cold cup of coffee. Zara's voice, a soft chime in their minds, broke the silence. My people are gone, their story told, but their purpose does not have to end with them. I have no world to return to. Let this ship be my home. Let my knowledge be your guide. Lena looked up, seeing not an alien relic, but a person offering the last gift her civilization possessed. What could we possibly offer you in return? Zara's silver eyes held a glimmer of something new, something that had not existed in the memories of the Zhar. Hope you offer a future, she replied. My people looked inward at the end, building a perfect cage. You look outward. You seek connection even when it is difficult. Your species stands at a crossroads, much as mine once did. You are beginning to reach for the stars, to tamper with energies you do not fully comprehend. I can help you see the paths ahead, to recognize the warnings before it is too late. I can teach you that true strength is not in dominating nature, but in understanding your place within it. This was not a transaction, but an alliance. It was a promise that the Zhar's greatest lesson would not be the sacrifice they made, but the wisdom that could have prevented the need for it. The Odyssey was no longer just a freighter. It had become a vessel carrying the last ember of a dead sun, a chance to build a future not on the fear of what lurks in the dark, but on the courage to walk into it with open eyes. The Harbinger drifted like a gutted whale, its hull scarred and venting atmosphere into the void. Its weapons were dark, its engines a wreck. A single, damaged shuttle detached from its belly, carrying Commander Valerius and his surviving officers to the Odyssey under a flag of truce. They stood in the freighter's cargo bay, a stark contrast to their former arrogance, their postures rigid with the shock of survival. They had not seen the sacrifice in the vault, but they had felt the universe hold its breath. They had watched a planet dissolve into stardust to pay a debt they had tried to steal. Valerius' voice, once sharp with command, was hollow. "You have your victory," he stated, not looking at Lena, but at the deck plating. But what was the prize? We saw no weapon, no power to claim, only an ending. Lena's reply was quiet, yet it filled the bay. "The prize was your life, Commander. And every other life in the galaxy. The power you sought was never for taking. It was a shield, and it demanded a warden. A good man is now part of the walls of a prison you tried to kick down." The corporate officers shifted uncomfortably. They were accountants of war, men who understood profit and loss, but the ledger before them now was written in terms they could not quantify. A civilization erased, a captain annihilated, a universe saved. How do you calculate the return on that investment? Valerius finally met her gaze, and the cold ambition was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding. He had not been chasing a tool, but a fundamental law of reality, one that balanced on a single, terrible principle. Some doors are meant to stay closed. He and his crew would return to corporate space. They would carry no schematics, no exotic matter, no weapon blueprints. They would carry only a story, a warning etched into their memories. They would tell their superiors of a people who sacrificed their future to buy time for strangers, and of a man who gave his eternity to hold the line. They would explain that some forces are not assets to be leveraged, but responsibilities that can crush a soul. It was a reckoning not of force, but of conscience. Would a corporation built on consumption understand the value of a sacrifice? Perhaps not. But the story itself would become a containment field, a new kind of prison for reckless ambition, built not from energy, but from the haunting, unanswerable weight of a truth too terrible to ignore. The silence aboard the Odyssey was a heavy, shared thing. In the days that followed, the crew moved through the ship's corridors with a quiet purpose, their hands busy with repair conduits and power relays, their minds grappling with the void left behind. There were no grand speeches, no formal eulogies for Aris Thorne. His memorial was etched into the scorch marks on the hull, the patched conduits in engineering, and the determined set of every crew member's shoulders as they worked. A shared, unspoken understanding passed between them, a bond forged in the crucible of a sacrifice that had saved all of reality. They had looked into the heart of cosmic indifference and had not been found wanting. Chief Engineer Kale directed the repairs with a new, quiet intensity, his commands soft but firm. When Ensign Rorik, now under guard, offered technical advice to bypass a damaged relay, it was Kale who listened, his decision based on practicality, not suspicion. The betrayal had cut deep, but the greater threat they had faced made old grievances feel small, almost petty. They were all that was left of a truth too vast for any one person to carry, and that shared burden demanded a unity they had never needed before. In the mess hall during a rare break, Someone would mention the captain, not with sorrow, but with a story. They remembered his terrible coffee, his habit of humming an old space shanty when he was deep in thought, the way he always took the first watch on a long haul. These small, human memories became anchors, holding them fast against the tide of cosmic scale. They were not mourning a hero who had become a god, but a man who had made a choice, and in doing so, had shown them the shape of true courage. It was a courage measured not in battles won, but in the quiet acceptance of an endless, lonely duty. What do you do with a second chance bought at such a price? The answer was slowly taking shape in the hum of the ship's restored systems and the renewed trust in each other's eyes. They would not let his watch be in vain. The restored engines hummed with a familiar, comforting vibration as the Odyssey aligned for its first jump. On the main view screen, the last remnants of the Zhar homeworld hung in the void, a vast, shimmering cloud of crystalline dust that caught the distant starlight. It no longer looked like the corpse of a planet, but like a nebula of memory, each glittering mote a silent testament to the civilization that had turned itself into starlight to save them all. The ship held position for a long moment, a final, silent salute to the tomb and the Warden now bound within its heart. Then space itself seemed to fold, the starfield stretching into impossible lines as the freighter leapt into the blur of faster-than-light travel. The cloud vanished, but its image was seared into the mind of every person on the bridge. They were not just carrying a story home, they were carrying the ghost of a star. How do you return to a life of freight runs and commerce after witnessing the birth of a new universe and the death of a savior? The silence on the bridge was the beginning of an answer, a shared understanding that the universe they were returning to was not the same one they had left, because they were not the same people. The quiet rhythm of the ship was a fragile cradle for their grief and their newfound purpose, a small, determined light moving through an immeasurable darkness that now felt a little less empty and a little less lonely. Zara watched the crew's morning routine with the focused curiosity of a scholar studying a newly discovered ecosystem. The simple act of sharing a meal in the mess hall fascinated her. The casual laughter and traded stories a stark contrast to the Zhar's silent, communal psychic bonds. She began to mimic their gestures, her movements at first unnervingly precise, then gradually softening into something more natural. Her first spoken word was not a technical term, but a name, Lena, spoken with a soft, chiming accent that brought a smile to the chief science officer's face. Language became her bridge, and she crossed it with an astonishing speed, her mind weaving through English syntax and idiom like a master composer learning a new musical scale. Her questions were never simple. She did not ask what a tool was for, but why it was shaped that way, probing the human psychology behind every design. This unique perspective soon revealed inefficiencies no one had noticed. She observed the power distribution in engineering and suggested a minor recalibration to the plasma flow, a tweak that increased engine efficiency by 2%. It was not a revolution, but a quiet optimization, the kind of elegant solution her people would have appreciated. Her greatest contribution, however, began in the quiet hours of the night cycle. She and Lena started their project in the science lab, a joint record they called the Echo of Zhar. It was not a dry historical account. Zara would access the racial memories stored within her, not as clean data, but as sensory impressions, emotions, and fragments of art. She would describe the scent of a Zhar rain, the feeling of a shared thought, the haunting beauty of a symphony composed of light and mathematics. Lena would then translate these psychic echoes into human language, framing them with context, turning feeling into narrative. Together, they were not just recording history. They were building a bridge between two kinds of soul, preserving the heart of a people who had sacrificed their future so that others might learn from their past. Can a civilization truly die if its story is told with such love and understanding? The gentle hum of the Odyssey was a comforting lie. It was during a routine scan of a nebula's magnetic field that the ship's long-range sensors chimed with a soft, insistent alarm. The signature was faint, a ghost on the edge of detection, but its profile was one the computer had been programmed to recognize with absolute priority. It was the same unique quantum decay pattern, the same faint scream of unraveled reality that had characterized the Devourer. A microscopic fragment of that ancient entity, a single spark of the all-consuming void, had somehow escaped the perfect prison. It drifted now, a speck of cosmic cancer carried on the solar winds. The threat was not gone. It had merely been scattered, and one small piece of it was now loose in the galaxy. How do you contain a shadow when even a sliver of it can cast a new darkness? The silence on the bridge was no longer one of grief, but of a cold, dawning dread. Their victory had not been an ending, but a fragile, temporary stay of execution. The echo in the void was a promise, a whisper that the universe's hunger was not so easily sated. The nebula's cold light bled across the main viewscreen, but Lena Vance saw only the ghost on her scanner. That faint, horrifying signature of escaped entropy burned in her vision, a promise that their ordeal was not over. In the deep quiet of the night cycle, she retreated to the science lab, the weight of this new dread pressing down. She called up the echo of Zhar files, seeking solace in the ancient wisdom, a reminder of what they were fighting for. The data streams flowed, luminous and complex, a river of a billion memories. It was there, nestled within a cascading sequence of energy patterns that described the seal's activation, that she found it. A data packet that did not belong to the Zhar. It was a human neural signature, a recording, time-stamped to the final microseconds of Aris Thorne's physical existence. Her breath caught. She isolated the file, her hands trembling as she initiated playback. His voice filled the room not through the speakers, but as a soft, synthesized echo, the direct translation of his final thoughts. Lena, if you are hearing this, then the seal held, and you found my message in the river. I am everywhere and nowhere now. The Matrix showed me more than a prison. It showed me a map of the cosmos, a history written in the scars of dead stars. The Zhar were not alone in their struggle. They were one of many. His voice was calm, devoid of the panic of a dying man, but filled with the immense sorrow of a cosmic historian. He spoke of other civilizations, names and locations that meant nothing to her. Worlds that had risen and fallen to threats humanity could not yet conceive. He described the Ionii, who built Dyson spheres around pulsars to hide their energy signatures from a predatory light. He spoke of the Thar, who uploaded their entire species into a simulated reality, fleeing a physical plague that consumed biological matter. Each story was a variation on a theme, a desperate, brilliant, and ultimately tragic act of survival against forces that treated galaxies as feeding grounds. They were all disconnected, he explained, isolated beacons of life snuffed out one by one, never knowing they were part of a pattern. The Devourer was not a unique monster. It was a symptom, a predator in an ecosystem of cosmic horrors. His warning was not of one enemy, but of a galaxy littered with the graves of those who failed to see the larger picture. We were never just saving ourselves from one threat, Lena. We were patching one leak in a dam that is riddled with them. The Zhar's sacrifice bought us time, but it is a currency that is running out. The network of silence is breaking down. His final words were not of fear, but of a chilling, profound responsibility. You are not just carrying a story. You are carrying a warning to a species that is still learning to walk. Do not let our watch be the last. The recording ended, leaving Lena in a silence more vast and terrifying than the void outside. They had escaped a single cage, only to learn they were in a zoo of unimaginable scale, and the other cages were beginning to rust open. What do you do when you discover the universe is not just empty, but hungry? The decision was not made in a formal meeting. but in the quiet spaces between repairs. It emerged in the mess hall over shared rations, in engineering as they rerouted damaged conduits, and on the bridge during the long, silent watches. The weight of Aris Thorne's final message had settled upon them not as a burden, but as a compass. One evening, as the ship sailed through a sea of unfamiliar stars, Lena called everyone to the common area. She did not stand at a podium but sat among them, her datapad resting on her knee. "We have a choice," she began, her voice clear in the hushed room. "We can complete our repairs, return to the trade lanes, and deliver our cargo. We can go back to the lives we had, or we can look at the map the captain left us. We can follow these echoes." Chief Engineer Kale was the first to speak, his voice a low rumble. "I have been running freight for 20 years. I have hauled machine parts and food synthesizers from one corporate station to another. After what we have seen, I do not think I can go back to worrying about profit margins and docking fees. It would feel like a betrayal." One by one, the others added their voices. The pilot spoke of the emptiness of charted space, the thrill of the unknown now a permanent part of her. The security officers, once hired for simple protection, now saw their purpose redefined. They were not just guarding a ship and its crew anymore. They were guarding a secret that held the fabric of reality together. Zara watched the exchange, her silver eyes reflecting the faces of these humans. When Lena finally called for a vote, it was a formality. The decision was unanimous. The Odyssey would not be going home. Their old contracts, their debts, their former lives, all of it was relegated to a distant past. The freighter was repurposed, its cargo holds slowly reconfigured into expanded living quarters, advanced sensor suites, and a dedicated astrometrics lab built around Zara's unique knowledge. They were no longer a commercial vessel. They had become something else entirely, a ghost ship with a living heart, dedicated to a single, monumental task. They would follow the star charts from Thorne's final broadcast, seeking out the graves of fallen civilizations and the whispers of those still hiding. They would become the galaxy's silent archivists, the guardians of stories too terrible and beautiful to be forgotten. In a universe that consumed its children, they would be the ones who remembered their names. What is a life, if not a story told in the choices we make? Theirs was now a story written in stardust and sacrifice, and they were only on the first page. The name Odyssey was quietly retired, its registry updated in the silent, depthless archives of deep space. The ship was now the legacy, a name that felt both like a promise and a eulogy. Its new course was not plotted toward any port or trading hub, but toward a set of coordinates pulled from the ghost in their machine, the final broadcast of Aris Thorne. The first destination was a star system marked on no known chart, a place the Zhar had known only as a graveyard of whispered light. Zara stood beside the navigation console, her opalescent fingers tracing the projected star lanes. Her presence was their living compass, a mind that held the echoes of a trillion lost memories. She did not command but guided, interpreting the subtle data streams with an intuition born of a civilization that had mapped the universe by feeling its psychic tremors. The crew moved with a quiet intensity, their work no longer about profit or schedule, but about preparation for the unimaginable. The legacy was their covenant, a vessel of remembrance sailing into the silent, hungry dark. What do you pack for a journey to the end of someone else's world? The answer was not in their cargo manifest, but in the determined silence that had settled over them all, a resolve as hard and cold as the void outside their hull. The silence on the Legacy's bridge was a focused, living thing. Zara stood before the main holodisplay, her slender fingers dancing through star charts that shimmered with the psychic cartography of her people. She was cross-referencing two ghosts, the cold, hard coordinates from Aris Thorne's final broadcast with the ancient, intuitive maps of the Zhar, which charted not just space, but the emotional resonance of lost civilizations. Her silver eyes narrowed, and she pointed to a patch of void on the very fringe of the galactic spiral. There, a gravitational whisper, a place my people called the Unspoken Grave. The charts show a rogue planet, a world torn from its star in some forgotten cataclysm, drifting in the perpetual dark between galaxies. It should be a frozen ball of nothing, a tomb of ice and rock. Yet it registers a faint, persistent echo, a data signature that is neither Zhar nor human. It is something else entirely. The planet is a legend whispered among the few deep space scouts who have dared the absolute void. A place they call the Wandering Tomb, rumored to hold the corpse of an empire that fell before Earth's sun had even ignited. What drives a world to leave its star, and what secrets does it carry in its lonely exile? The answer, it seems, is waiting for them in the silent, starless deep. This was not just another point on a map. It was a promise and a test. Could they decipher the language of a species that had died in the dark? And would that knowledge be a key, or another lock on a door they were not meant to open? The void beyond the galactic rim was a different kind of darkness, an absolute absence that drank light and sound. The legacy pushed into this starless expanse, its running lights tiny and insignificant against the infinite black. Standard navigation was useless here, with no pulsars to lock onto and no stellar background for reference. They were sailing by dead reckoning, guided only by Zara's ancient charts and the faint, persistent whisper of the Wandering Tomb. The ship's hull groaned under stresses it was never designed to handle, a constant, low creak that became the soundtrack to their journey. Strange gravitational tides pulled at them, invisible currents in the fabric of space that would suddenly tug the million-ton vessel off course without warning. It felt less like flying and more like being adrift in a cosmic ocean, caught in a riptide they could not see. Their resolve was being tested not by a visible enemy, but by the sheer, oppressive indifference of the void itself. How do you maintain your courage when the universe itself seems to be telling you that you do not belong? The answer was etched into the face of every crew member, a quiet, stubborn determination to see the story through. The first anomaly registered as a shimmer on the edge of the main view screen, a heatless ripple in reality that distorted the blackness behind it. Then the alarms blared. A gravitational shear, a tear in spacetime so violent it could slice a ship in half, was forming directly in their path. The helmsman's hands flew across his console, firing maneuvering thrusters in a desperate dance to skirt the invisible edge of the distortion. The Legacy shuddered violently, its inertial dampeners straining as the ship was wrenched sideways. For a terrifying moment, the stars behind them, the last familiar anchor to the galaxy, stretched into impossible, wobbly lines before snapping back into place. This was not empty space. It was a minefield of twisted physics, a graveyard of broken natural laws. Each maneuver burned precious fuel and taxed their newly upgraded systems to their limits. They were not just pilots anymore. They were surgeons operating on a patient whose anatomy was constantly changing, navigating a body of space that was sick and dying. Could their patchwork freighter, for all its heart and soul, truly survive in a realm where the very rules of existence seemed to be breaking down? Zara stood unmoved at the science station, her form a pillar of calm in the chaotic bridge. Her perception of space was not bound by human instruments. She could feel the gravitational topography, sensing the treacherous folds and pits in the void like a bat navigating a cave. Her directions were soft, psychic impressions more than words, guiding the helmsman with an intuition that felt like a sixth sense, left by 3 degrees. There is a calm channel just ahead. The distortions, she explained, were not random. They were scars, the lingering aftereffects of a cataclysm so immense it had permanently bruised this region of space. The rogue planet they sought was not just drifting, it was fleeing, and the violent ripples in its wake were the only trail it had left behind. They were following the pain of a world, a path of cosmic trauma that led to a tomb. What kind of event could wound the fabric of reality itself? And what could possibly be left alive, or even intact, at the epicenter of such violence? The question hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the secrets they sought were guarded by forces beyond human comprehension. The silence of the void seeped into the ship and into Zara's dreams. She did not sleep as humans did, but her mind drifted in a state of deep meditation, and in that state the echoes came. They were not her memories, but something far older, psychic residue left upon the matrix of reality itself, imprinted there by the Zhar's final, collective thought. She saw visions of stars being threaded like beads on a string of light, of galaxies spun on looms of gravitational force. And through these visions, a name surfaced, a legend whispered in the halls of her ancestors. They were called the Weavers, beings of the first dawn of the universe who did not build with stone or energy, but who could manipulate the very threads of space-time, tying knots of stability into the chaotic fabric of the cosmos. They were the architects of the fundamental constants, the reason some regions of space held firm while others frayed at the edges. The gravitational distortions the legacy now navigated were not just scars. They were the torn and tangled remnants of a tapestry, a place where the weavers had once worked, and where their work had catastrophically failed. What force could unravel the hands of a god? The answer was not a memory, but a profound and chilling absence, the feeling of a loom left silent, its masters gone. The rogue planet appeared not as a sphere, but as a jagged silhouette of blacker black against the endless void. Its surface was a tortured landscape of deep canyons, carved not by water but by eons of relentless cosmic winds, a labyrinth of shadows that seemed to swallow their ship's powerful scanning beams. The legacy held its position, a tiny sentinel before this world of absolute desolation. Initial sensor sweeps revealed nothing but rock and ice, a frozen corpse adrift for billions of years. It was Zara who first noticed the anomaly, a whisper of structured energy so faint it was almost a memory. "Look deeper," she urged, her mind touching theirs. Beneath the canyons, the planet's crust is a shield. They recalibrated, focusing their long-range sensors on the subterranean depths, and there it was. A ghost in the machine. Vast geometric shapes arranged with impossible precision lay buried miles beneath the surface. They were not ruins, but intact structures, humming with a low energy field that perfectly mimicked the background radiation of the planet's own core. It was a stealth field of unimaginable sophistication, a cloak designed not just to hide from sight, but to make this complex appear as a natural, geological formation to any prying eyes. This was no accidental tomb. This was a vault, deliberately hidden in the most lonely place imaginable. What kind of mind chooses a rogue planet as a hiding place, and what could be so valuable or so dangerous that it requires a shroud of absolute nothingness to keep it safe? The silence from below was not the silence of death, but the profound, patient quiet of a secret that has been waiting longer than stars have burned. The canyons of the rogue planet were a maze of perpetual midnight, their walls sheer and cold. The legacy set down in the deepest crevasse, where the shadows were so absolute they felt like a physical weight. Before them, set seamlessly into the canyon wall, was an archway that was not carved stone, but a living membrane of woven light. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow like a sleeping heart. As the landing party approached, the light remained inert, ignoring their scanners and their presence completely. But when Zara stepped forward, the reaction was instantaneous. The archway bloomed. Intricate patterns of gold and silver light spiraled out from its center, flowing like liquid metal. The soft pulses quickened into a vibrant, welcoming hum. A resonant tone, deep and melodic, echoed through the canyon, a sound that had not been heard for eons. The membrane parted, not as a door sliding open, but as a curtain of light being drawn aside, revealing a passage that led deep into the planet's heart. The technology was not recognizing a person, but a lineage. It had been waiting for the psychic signature of a creator race, and in Zara, it had found the closest living echo. What kind of lock opens not for a key, but for a ghost of a memory? Inside, the air was warm and carried the scent of ozone and something alive, like a forest after a rain. This was no crystal tomb like the Zhar archive. The walls of the chamber were not built, they were grown. They were composed of a smooth, woody material interlaced with filaments of pure light that throbbed in time with the archway's heartbeat. Great root-like structures descended from the ceiling, their ends glowing with soft, bioluminescent orbs that illuminated the vast space. In the center of the chamber, a massive, tree-like console rose from the floor, its bark-like surface etched with flowing, organic circuits that shimmered with internal power. As Zara moved closer, the console responded. A low, pleased hum vibrated through the chamber, and a section of the console unfolded like a blooming flower, revealing a basin filled with a swirling, liquid light. This was the core interface. It was an archive built not for data storage, but for communion, designed to share knowledge through a direct, empathic link. It was a living library, and it had just invited its first reader in a billion years. How do you read a book whose pages are made of thought and feeling? Zara placed her hands upon the basin, the liquid light swirling up to envelop her fingers. Her silver eyes widened, not with fear, but with a profound and overwhelming awe. She was not downloading information, she was experiencing it. Visions flooded her mind, not as images on a screen, but as lived memories. She felt the immense, patient joy of the weavers as they stabilized a young star system, gently guiding planets into stable orbits. She felt the intricate focus required to tie a knot in space-time, creating a region of calm in a turbulent nebula. Their consciousness was not individual, but a collective chorus, a symphony of minds working in perfect harmony to nurture the structure of the cosmos. They were gardeners of reality, tending to the fundamental forces as if they were delicate plants. The archive showed her their purpose, their peaceful existence spanning billions of years. And then it showed her the silence. The memory shifted into a chilling emptiness. The vibrant chorus of the weavers was severed, not by a slow decline, but by a sudden, absolute cessation. One moment, the network was a brilliant tapestry of interconnected thought, and the next, it was a void. Every single weaver across the entire galaxy had gone silent in the same instant. It was not a war. It was a snap of cosmic fingers, an extinction event that left no trace, no enemy, and no warning. The archive itself did not know why. It only held the echo of the silence, a grief so vast and complete it had been woven into the very walls of this hidden refuge. What kind of predator hunts not bodies, but consciousness itself, and can erase a galactic civilization between one heartbeat and the next? The liquid light in the basin surged upward, enveloping Zara's hands and arms in a brilliant, warm cascade. The entire chamber seemed to breathe in, the root-like structures on the ceiling pulsing with a sudden, urgent light. From the heart of the tree-like console, a figure coalesced, woven from strands of gold and silver radiance. It was a weaver. Its form was humanoid, yet utterly alien, with limbs that seemed made of intertwined gravitational filaments and a face that was a calm, shifting map of constellations. Its voice, when it spoke, was not a sound, but a resonance that vibrated in their bones and filled their minds with pure, unadulterated concept. You have come. The echo of a creator has found our last memory. We have waited. The entity's gaze seemed to rest on each of them, a look of immense, timeless sorrow. You believe you have faced the great darkness. You have contained the Devourer. This voice held no judgment, only a profound and heartbreaking pity. But you have merely swatted a fly at the entrance to the hive. The Devourer was not the end. It was a probe, a single sensory tendril sent forth by a presence so vast our language has no word for it. We called it the silence. The hologram shifted. The vision of the vibrant cosmic tapestry dissolved, replaced by an image of the universe not as a collection of stars, but as a magnificent, shimmering web of interconnected threads, the very fabric of spacetime, reality itself. Then a blot appeared. It was not blackness, not emptiness, but an absolute negation. Where it touched, the threads of the web did not break. They simply ceased to have ever existed. The laws of physics, causality, memory, all of it was unwritten, erased from the cosmic ledger without a trace. The Devourer consumes energy and matter. The silence consumes context. It eats history, possibility, and the very framework that allows anything to be. It is the end of information. The holographic weaver gestured to the terrifying blot. Our civilization was a network of consciousness woven into this fabric. We were its stewards. The silence did not attack us. It simply arrived, and where its perception fell, we were unmade. Not killed, unremembered, our greatest failure was our isolation. We believed our purpose was to tend the garden alone. We never thought to build a fence with the other gardeners. The vision focused on a single, horrifying detail. As the silence advanced, the Weaver watched entire star systems not explode, but fade, their light, their planets, their very atomic structure dissolving into a gray, featureless static, as if the universe itself was forgetting how to hold them together. The sacrifice of the Zhar, the eternal vigil of Aris Thorne, these were heroic, beautiful acts, but they were a bucket of water thrown at a forest fire. The silence is the fire, and it is burning its way through the branches of reality, one galaxy at a time. The hologram of the Weaver began to flicker, its form dissolving back into the light of the console. Its final thought echoed in the chamber, a whisper of desperate, billion-year-old hope. You are not the first to find this archive. You are merely the first to arrive before the silence did. Find the others, the gardeners, the builders, the singers in the void. Our strength was in unity. Your only hope will be the same. For if you fail, there will be no one left to even mourn your passing, for the concept of grief will have never existed at all. The holographic Weaver dissolved, its final warning a chill that lingered in the warm, living air. As the last strand of light faded from the console, the swirling basin of liquid light coalesced, hardened, and cooled. Where there had been fluid energy, a single, flawless data crystal now rested, its core swirling with captured constellations. Zara lifted it, her fingers trembling. This was not a record of the past. It was a key to the present. Back aboard the Legacy, the crystal did not project a simple star chart. It unfolded a multi-dimensional atlas of existence itself. The main viewscreen bloomed with a complex, shimmering web, each glowing node representing a discrete reality, a parallel dimension where physics and possibility had taken a different path. It was a tapestry of everything that could be, and it was being systematically unmade. The crew watched in horrified silence as the map animated. A creeping, gray static began at the edges of the cosmic web, a blight that moved with patient, inexorable purpose. Where it passed, the brilliant nodes of reality did not explode or collapse. They simply faded. Their light winked out, their connections to the web severed, leaving behind not empty space, but a profound and absolute blankness, a void where a universe had once been. The silence was not just in their dimension. It was a cancer metastasizing through the multiverse, consuming the branches of reality one by one. Their mission to document fallen civilizations felt suddenly, terrifyingly small. They were not just archivists for a single galaxy anymore. They were scouts on the front lines of a war for existence itself, witnessing the collapse of infinity. How do you fight an enemy that is erasing the very battlefields you stand on? The scale of the threat was beyond human comprehension, a nightmare so vast it threatened to paralyze the mind. The data crystal held more than a map of the disease. It charted the potential medicine. Scattered across the multi-dimensional web, like a handful of diamonds cast onto a dark canvas, or a few dozen nodes that burned with a fierce, defiant light. These were the shielded realities, dimensions where civilizations had somehow detected the encroaching silence and raised defenses. The Weaver Archive had identified them, not as fortresses, but as sanctuaries, the last repositories of knowledge and life in a dying multiverse. One reality in particular pulsed with a unique, harmonic frequency, its light a soft, steady blue. The crystal's data stream identified it with a string of symbols that translated roughly to the resonance. According to the Weaver records, the inhabitants of this dimension had not built walls of energy or weapons of war. They had engineered their entire reality to function as a single, unified consciousness, a collective mind whose psychic harmony created a natural barrier against the silence's dissonant, unmaking frequency. They had not fought the darkness, they had sung it into stillness, but the map showed the gray static slowly, patiently, encircling this blue haven, testing its defenses for a single, weak note in its grand symphony. Their mission was no longer a choice, but a gravitational pull. They had to reach the resonance, to learn the song of unity before the last singer fell silent. The legacy was no longer just a ship. It was a needle, and the Weaver had just handed them the thread to begin stitching the unraveling cosmos back together. The legacy's bridge felt smaller than ever, the weight of the multiverse pressing in from the starless void outside. Lena Vance stared at the main display, where the gray static of the silence slowly encroached on the last defiant lights. A direct, public warning was impossible. It would trigger a panic that would ripple across 1,000 worlds, a chaos that would only make the consuming silence's work easier. They needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Her fingers flew across her console, accessing a secure, point-to-point quantum entanglement communicator, a technology so experimental it was practically theoretical. She began composing a message, not for governments or militaries, but for a handful of names, men and women she had debated with at academic conferences and trusted with the universe's strangest secrets. The message was brief, its language a careful blend of scientific jargon and personal appeal. It spoke of anomalous gravitational decay patterns and recursive reality failures, but it also spoke of duty, of a shared responsibility to protect the flame of knowledge. She attached a heavily encrypted, microscopic fragment of the Weaver data, just enough to prove the insanity of her claims, a glimpse of the unraveling cosmic web. She did not ask for soldiers or weapons, she asked for minds. She proposed a clandestine network, a silent alliance operating in the shadows of official channels, dedicated to a single purpose: understanding the anatomy of the silence and searching for a cure before the patient even knew it was sick. How do you convince someone the sky is falling without them looking up and screaming? You hand them a single, impossible feather and ask them to trust you about the storm. One by one, the secure acknowledgements flickered on her screen, a constellation of the galaxy's brightest minds signaling their silent, terrified agreement. They were no longer just scientists. They were doctors preparing for a plague that erased its own symptoms, and their first task was to diagnose a patient that was the entire universe. The ship's common area felt different that night. The usual quiet hum of the air recyclers was the only sound, a steady breath in the metal lungs of their vessel. Lena stood before her crew, not as a captain giving orders, but as a fellow witness to an impossible truth. She held up the Weaver's data crystal, its internal light casting soft, shifting patterns on their faces. "We have seen the end of everything," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Not a war, not a bang, but a slow, patient erasure. And we are the only ones who know it is coming." She placed the crystal on the central table. "It is not enough to remember the dead. We must become the memory for those who are still living. We need to make a promise, not just to ourselves, but to the Zhar, to the Weavers, to every silenced voice in the dark." One by one, they stepped forward. Chief Engineer Kale laid his grease-stained hand on the cool crystal, his calloused fingers a testament to a life of fixing broken things. "I will seek the truth in the ruins," he vowed, "even if it is a truth I do not want to hear." The pilot placed her hand over his, her touch as precise as her navigation. "I will protect the innocent," she whispered, "those who still have a future to lose." Each member of the crew, from the youngest technician to the most seasoned security officer, added their hand and their voice. They swore to stand against the coming silence, to be a voice where there was only void, a presence where there was only absence. They pledged their lives, their futures, and their very memories to this one sacred duty. Finally, Zara approached. Her opalescent hand hovered for a moment before settling over the human ones. A soft, golden warmth radiated from her touch, a psychic echo of the oath binding them all. "My people sacrificed their destiny to buy time," her voice chimed in their minds. "I pledge my knowledge, my life, and the echo of my entire civilization to this covenant. I will stand with you until my last thought fades into the quiet." There were no grand gestures, no shouted declarations. The oath was sealed in the silence that followed, a deeper quiet than the void outside, filled with the terrible weight of their new purpose. They were no longer just a crew. They were a testament, a living shield, and a promise etched against the dying of the light. What is an oath but a soul choosing its anchor in the coming storm? The legacy's new course was a single, unwavering line drawn across the star charts, aimed at the first flickering breach point on the Weaver's impossible map. On the bridge, the coordinates were locked, and the hum of the hyperdrive built to a crescendo that vibrated in their bones. As the ship began its leap, the star field outside the viewport stretched into luminous threads. Zara stood motionless, her opalescent form silhouetted against the rushing light, and her voice was a soft chime in the quiet. "For my people, for Thorne, for all who are silent." It was not a prayer, but a declaration, a naming of the debts that now propelled them forward. Then the ship vanished, leaving behind the known galaxy, a fleeting afterimage swallowed by the infinite dark. They were gone, carrying the legacy of the Zhar and the eternal weight of a captain's sacrifice into the silent, hungry void. Their journey had no end, only a purpose: to stand as sentinels in the growing shadow, to remember what the universe was forgetting. What would they find waiting for them at the edge of reality? And would their small, human courage be enough to face a silence that could unmake the